Hey, everybody. I think when we left this last time, I had just quit my high paying job in Midtown Manhattan in the Diamond District, thanks to the influence of Catalina Montero Alvarez. Where are you now, Catalina Montero Alvarez? Wow, let's see. She was probably in her mid 30s, I would guess. And that was what, the mid 80s? So what's that? So she's in her 60s now? Catalina. Thank you. Anyway, so what happened next? I went to my parents' house, quit my job, had all this money, I don't think I mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned in the last episode, this Russian guy that I met, who went in an office in one of the buildings I was managing. He was he was a funny little guy. I mean, these days, I may have mentioned that in the mid 80s, you could buy your way out of the Soviet Union. You know, the world was still divided up into the Russians or the communists and the so-called free world, the capitalist world. You know, it occurs to me that a lot of people listening to this, if you're in your 20s or maybe even in your early 30s, the notion of what it was like living in the 80s is as exotic to you as India, in a way. You know, the internet was a huge, huge change in the way it feels to be alive if you're living in the modern world. You know, if you're in a little village in Zimbabwe, I guess it doesn't matter as much, or maybe it does because now everybody has phones there. But in the days before cell phones and internet, email, all that, the world was a very different place. And the Soviet Union, when the Soviet Union still existed, there was a very clear division of, you know, here and there, us and them. Anyway, this guy had bought his way out of the Soviet Union, probably, you know, with his pockets full of diamonds, came to New York and wanted to establish himself in the diamond business there. And you really need to have an office on 47th Street in order to do that. So anyway, he and I met, and he, I don't know what he saw in me, but he decided that he was going to just work me till he got an office. And there were no offices, you know, but one day we were in my office, and he came by like every week, just insistent, always a good humor and a big smile on his face. And so he wanted to take me out to lunch, and I knew he was trying to like bribe me or, you know, whatever, but there just were no offices. And there were already people, you know, on a waiting list. And so I refused, but he was a nice guy and whatever. And after a while, I was like, okay, look, we can go to lunch, but we'll go to this burger place on 48th Street. So we went to the burger place, and it was awkward and weird. You know, and I was in my 3-piece suit with a tie and, you know, the whole fucking shebang. And I remember taking this bottle of ketchup, and instead of I don't know what I was thinking, but I shook it like I was flicking a whip, you know, like a back and forth, not up and down. And so it sort of, I flicked it toward him, and then toward me, and then toward him, and then toward me. And when I flicked it toward myself, the top came off, and I splattered the side of my face and neck with ketchup. I mean, it was an explosion of ketchup in this crowded Midtown Manhattan burger joint. The whole restaurant, there was like a beat of silence, like everybody stopped talking, and then hilarity when they saw that I don't know. It's not what they saw in me. They just all started laughing. And thank God the cap came off when it was going towards me and not towards him. Because if I had splattered him with ketchup, I'm not sure how that would have turned out. But that ketchup, man, I was wearing a dress shirt with a tie and that ketchup was inside. It got under my collar. It was down under my neck. So it was a hell of a splatter. Anyway, this guy, eventually he, I don't think, can I get in trouble for saying this? I don't think so. Hypothetically, he put an envelope on my desk one day when he was leaving. I didn't notice until after he was gone. And hypothetically, in this envelope was a lot of $100 bills, which hypothetically he may have been trying to use to bribe me. And it just so happens that an office opened up about that time. And I told him, like, I can't take this money. I called him, and and he said, just I'll get it. I'll pick it up next time I'm there, whatever. Anyway, this is about the time I quit the job, and hypothetically, some of that money may have made it into my travel funds. And when I was leaving to go to India, I made several mistakes. One was that I packed as if I were going to Alaska, right? You always generals fight the last war, right? And you pack for the last place you went. So I packed for India as if I were going camping in the middle of the tundra. I had sleeping bag, I had a tent, I had water filter, and I had all sorts of stuff. And you don't camp in India. I didn't really understand that until I got there, but you just don't really do that. So anyway, so I packed up all this stuff, and then I decided at the last minute that I really should cut back on weight a little bit. But instead of getting rid of the tent or the sleeping bag, I decided not to take my Walkman and cassette tapes, which turned out to be an interesting because I thought, well, listen to Indian music, not really understanding how different Indian music is and how hard it was going to be for me to enjoy Indian music. So anyway, I went all around the United States saying goodbye to people before I left for Asia. Now, this will sound weird to you listening to this, but in those days, I was going away for a couple of years at least. I didn't know when I would come back. And there was no way to stay in touch with people other than sending letters that could take a month to get there, to get to the U.S. from India, right? And then what? If they were going to write back to me, they wouldn't know where to write because I didn't have an address. In fact, with the woman that I was corresponding with and with my parents, what they had to do was I would send them a letter. Let's say it's the beginning of November. I would send a letter to them, okay? I would calculate that it would get there at the end of November, and then if they wrote back right away, that's another month, so then it would get to me around the end of December. So then I had to figure out, okay, where am I going to be in mid-January, to give it like 2 weeks in case it's late or something. I don't want to miss it, right? So I have to calculate 2.5 months from now, where am I going to be? And tell them in the letter, you can write to me in Varanasi or in Delhi or in Pushkar or in whatever place I thought I was going to be in 2.5 months. I mean, these days you send an email from some tiny little village in Kerala and your friend gets it in half a second and writes back to you before you leave the internet cafe. It's a completely different world. Or you're getting it on your goddamn phone. It's incredible. And I'm not saying it's better, okay? I'm not saying it's worse necessarily, but I am saying it's very, very different and changes the experience of travel dramatically. Anyway, so I went all around the U.S. saying goodbye to people, my cousins, my aunt and uncle, various friends, women that I was sort of chasing around, whatever. And I went to L.A. and then I flew out of L.A. to stopped in Bangkok for a couple of nights, which was confusing and weird, and then to Delhi. So I arrive in Delhi, And I remember there was a guy on the flight from Bangkok to Delhi, an Israeli guy, and we sat next to each other, and he had traveled a lot in India. And I remember him saying, that there are people who love India and there are people who just can't take India at all. Like nobody seems to be in the middle, And I also remember him saying there's no way to prepare for India. Like you just can't imagine what it's like until you're there. And I think he was right about that. So today I'm going to tell you a little story about an experience I had upon arriving in India. This is one of the first things that happened to me in India. So I went around, said goodbye to everybody, spent about a month traveling in the U.S., flew into India, landed in New Delhi late at night, I remember, and there were the debris of the Diwali festival was all over the place. This is a festival where they set off fireworks everywhere. So there was that sort of smell of fireworks and, burned gunpowder and paper, shredded paper everywhere because they blow up and they leave the paper everywhere. But I hardly noticed it because everything was so amazing. The damp olfactory chaos ranging from curry to cow shit, this sleeping cities of people lined up along the sidewalks and roadsides. I remember coming in from the airport in a taxi and people were sleeping. Their heads were like, a couple of feet from where the wheels of this taxi were running down the road. People slept on the roads because they stayed warm at night. It was just incredible. Ox carts, cows, elephants, camels walking through the streets, between the trucks, the bicycles, pedestrians, unbelievable. And then when the sun came up the next day, the colors were blowing my mind. I'd never seen yellow or redder reds, not even when I was stoned out of my mind. It was just overwhelming and still overwhelms me in memory. The only still space in this marvelous mess, the eye of my personal Indian cyclone, was a small dark room I'd rented in a nondescript guest house near the old Delhi train station. I'd chosen it randomly. There were thousands just like it, offering a dozen or so rooms with leaking, rusty showers. I remember this one didn't even really have a shower. It just had a pipe sticking out of the wall. And you'd turn the faucet and water would come out of that pipe. Locks on the doors that you could have picked with your fingernail. I mean, locks that look more like toy locks than actual locks. And it had a small balcony overlooking the street. I was paying a couple bucks a night for the room, whatever, cheap. And someone had warned me to be really careful about thieves that would sneak into your room when you were sleeping and go through your stuff, that they were really, you had to be very careful about that. And I had decided that I was going to take most of my money in cash because I had read somewhere that you could get a better exchange rate on $100 bills than you could on traveler's checks. So to maximize my money, I was carrying probably about $10,000 in cash, and then, or maybe more. I think it's about $14,000 in cash, and then a couple thousand more in traveler's checks. I had an American Express card and my passport in a money belt, and which I wore under my pants. And at night, in order to make sure that there was no way anyone could steal my money and passport, I kept it under my pillow in bed because I thought there's no way someone's going to get in here. Even if I'm dead asleep, they're not going to get their hand under my pillow without me waking up, So about a week into this trip, into my stay in Delhi, I bought a ticket to go up to Jammu and Kashmir, specifically to a place called Srinagar, which is a lake in the Himalayas. It was the summer capital when the British ruled India. They used to go up there in the summers, and Actually, I don't know if it was the capital. I think there was another place that was the political capital, but Srinagar was where the wealthy British would get away for the summer because it was cool, high altitude. And there's this beautiful lake called Dal Lake, where they had these houseboats, and I'll talk about Dal Lake later. Some amazing things happened up there in Srinagar. Anyway, so I bought this ticket to go up there, and it's like a 2 or 3 day train ride. It's a long train ride. It goes up through the part of the country where the Sikhs live, or the Punjab. And in those days, there were Sikhs all over India, of course, but the Punjab is the sort of center of Sikh culture. Amritsar, I think, is the main city there, where the Golden Temple is. And these days, this was shortly after the president of India had been assassinated by her Sikh bodyguards, in fact. And so there was war brewing. There was a major conflict between the Sikh people and the sort of dominant cultural group in India, the Hindus. And so you needed special permission to pass through Punjab, even on the train. And, you had to agree you would not get off the train, and you'd get a special stamp in your passport and all that. Now you can go to the Punjab, but now you can't go to Kashmir, which is where I was headed, which at that point was open, because in Kashmir the population is mostly Muslim, and so there's a conflict there. Anyway, so I'd been staying in this place for about a week, in this guest house for about a week. It was a little small guest house, probably 15, maybe 20 rooms. There are hundreds and maybe thousands of them just like it in Old Delhi. And so I had this train ticket, and the train left really early in the morning. So I woke up, I packed up everything the night before, set my alarm, woke up 5 o'clock in the morning or whatever it was, brushed my teeth, maybe took a shower, got dressed, grabbed my backpack and everything, and left, checked out of the place, went to the train station. And I got there early, and I hadn't taken a train in India yet, so I had no idea how this was going to work, how I was going to find my car, my space. It's chaos everywhere. So I got there probably an hour early, and it was already hot. It's like 6:30 in the morning, and it's already hot. And I remember I'd gotten a chai, and I remember sort of squatting down next to my backpack and drinking this chai, and I felt a bead of sweat run down my spine, and I reached around to wipe the sweat from the small of my back, and I realized my money belt wasn't there. I didn't have my money belt. I'd left it under the pillow. This is a week into my round the world, don't know when I'll see you again, taking all the money in cash trip. So I jumped up, grabbed my backpack, and ran with this 60-pound backpack on my back through the chaotic streets of Old Delhi back to the guest house. I ran up through the entrance area there, and the manager was at the desk. I ran right past him. I went up to the door, banged on the door. Nobody. I could hear people were in there, but they wouldn't answer me, wouldn't open the door. I went back down to the lobby where the manager, who was a Sikh, was waiting for me. And for those of you who don't know, the Sikhs always wear a turban. They don't cut their hair, so the beard is sort of curled up into the turban often. They're known in India for being great warriors and very good businessmen, and now I know honorable people. Anyway, so I go down. Now I'm sweating, I'm shaking, I'm completely freaked out, as you can imagine. And I get down to the lobby, and the guy's looking at me, kind of concerned. He says, "What's happening?" And I said, "I need to get into my room. I left something in my room." And he said, "I'm afraid the room's already been rented to another client. What did you leave?" I said, "I left some papers." He said, "Well, what sort of papers?" "My passport. I left my passport in the room." Now, this guy was older than me, maybe around 40 or so. I can remember his beard curled up into the tight turban Sikh all men wear. I knew nothing at this point about Sikhs other than that they had a reputation for being good, honest businessmen, as I'd said. But they also were having problems in India. So because of the Sikh bodyguards had killed Indira Gandhi, who was the president. Anyway, this Sikh hotel manager was the first Sikh I'd ever spoken to, actually, personally. He said, "Oh my, a passport is important, sir. Did you leave anything else in the room?" It was at this point that I started to sense I was being tested. Maybe not tested necessarily by him. Maybe I was being tested by the universe. I don't know. But I felt, you ever get that feeling where suddenly the cameras are on you? Not real cameras, but the attention of the universe. The reality is watching. What are you going to do now? This is a moment. This is a make or break. This is a do or die. This is one of those moments where who you really are is going to be determined. Determined or maybe expressed. Maybe it's the same thing. Anyway, I remember his eyes, which I felt, I remember his eyes, and there was a touch of amusement in them. And maybe that's what keyed me into the sense of testing. I didn't sense any cruelty, but he found something amusing about this situation. And I remember that they were intelligent eyes. And so sort of instinctively, I just decided there's no point in lying or making any demands or trying to bluff anything or whatever. My fate was out of my hands. What could I do? I can't call the Indian police and tell them I'd abandoned $12,000 or $14,000 cash in my fucking $2 a night room, right? So I just sort of, rolled over like a puppy and said, I left money in the room. He said, "How much money?" And I said, "All my money, about $15,000. He said, $15,000? That's a lot of money, sir." He hesitated, then he leaned down and reached under the counter and handed me my money belt. I unzipped it and looked inside. I didn't count the money, but the stack of hundreds looked as thick as it had been the day before. When I counted it later, nothing was missing. He said to me, "Do you understand how much money this is in India, sir? One could buy this hotel and several others like it with this." "Yes," I said, "I understand. I can't believe I did this." He said, "The boy who cleans the rooms found your possessions. He brought this to me. This boy earns about $10 in a month's time." So I pulled out a few $100 bills, and I said, "Please give these to the boy with my thanks." And he said, "Oh, no, sir, that would insult him." I said, "Then what can I do?" He said, "Give me 300 rupees, which I think was about $15 then, and I'll have a party here with the other employees to honor him for his noble actions. That will be the thing to do." So I gave him what he asked for, And he said, okay, now go catch your train before you miss it, and please be more careful with your possessions. I shook his hand, I thanked him, and I ran back to the train station where I eventually found my place on the train. And you can imagine how that felt to sit on the train after that experience as the train pulled out, and I realized what had just happened, which is in a way that man had just saved my life. The life I now know I've had. The life I was trying to have then. Ultimately, that stack of $100 bills took me through India, Nepal, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Greece, France, Holland, Germany, Czechoslovakia, and back to New York. Along the way, I came to see myself, and at least imagined that others saw me, as a guy who had the wherewithal to step into the unknown and keep his balance, a savvy traveler, an experienced adventurer, a guy who could handle any situation. That became a central thread in my life story and my identity. Now, 30 years later, I'm comforted and protected and enriched by that self-image. That's why you're listening to me now, right? I consider this my own. It's something I earned. It's an aspect of my life that can never be taken away from me. These years of adventure, this willingness to confront risk and all that kind of stuff. But the truth is that this life that I'm so proud of was in many ways given to me by that man whose name I never asked on a hot November morning in 1986.